Make way for Bob Costas, the Hall of Fame broadcaster. HBO's Back on the Record with Bob Costas. That will make its debut this Friday night at 11 p.m. Eastern and Pacific. It can also be streamed on HBO Max. Each episode features extended conversations with some of the biggest names in sports, from present-day superstars to legends of the past. Bob joins us now. So who's the first guest on Friday night, Bob?
Well, it's an obvious get, you might say, but Charles Barkley is the leadoff, and the difference between this, we hope, and how you see him on TNT, where it's so terrific with Ernie and the gang, is that this will be a more extended conversation. I'm sure a lot of it will be very funny. Almost inevitably, it'll be provocative. So we'll have that, and then we have Ali Raisman, which turns out to be even more timely than we thought when we booked it. We'll have a closing essay and commentary. Bomani Jones is a regular on the show. He'll be part of a three-person panel every show. The other two people this time are Renee Montgomery, the former WNBA star who's now a part owner of the Atlanta Dream in the league, and David Cohn, the Yankee pitcher, to talk about a former Yankee pitcher, now broadcaster, to talk about a lot of what's going on in baseball.
What are you looking for in this show?
You know, the name pretty much says it, Back on the Record. We're not reinventing anything. I did the On the Record show from 01 through 08 on HBO, and then when the Baseball Network came into existence, they wanted me to be part of that, and baseball is my favorite sport, so I wanted to do it. And HBO at that time said, hey, we want you to stay, but you got to choose. So I chose the baseball and reluctantly left HBO behind. Otherwise, I would have just stayed indefinitely. Now things have changed a little bit. They invited me back. I'm only doing 4 of them a year. At this point, Dan, you know, you're working 5 days a week. Mm-hmm. That's not my ideal situation anymore. So it's supposed to be quarterly. We got pushed back a couple of times by COVID, so we'll do one a month for the next 4 months just to get the 4 in for 2021. Then next year we'll go on a quarterly cycle. And I think the idea is HBO already has Real Sports. It's the 60 minutes of sports. It's fantastic on its own terms. We're not trying to replicate that, not trying to replicate what we see on a daily or weekly basis on cable TV sports coverage. I just hope that on its own terms it's good. I hope that there's some depth to it, some entertainment to it. I hope it brings to bear some of the things I've done reasonably well over the course of my career.
Who is your favorite guest from On the Record?
Well, the one they talk about the most is Vince McMahon. It was good television, HBO, no commercials, and it was live. It turned out to be 27, 28 minutes of unremitting tension. And then after he went storming off the set, all we had was like a 20-second bumper to get me to the next setup on the set. So I walk over and sit down, and the next guest is Bob Knight. And I said, Coach, Coach, this is the one and only time in your life when your presence will lower the temperature in the room.
Did you think Vince McMahon was going to hit you?
No, I knew he was obviously, getting very, very angry. That was authentic. He was very, very angry, and I think he was trying to intimidate me through body language and jabbing a finger at me. But, maybe I'm just dumb, but I never thought he was going to smack me. Okay, so now he goes storming off, and you know how heavy the doors are to a studio. Yeah. He slammed that thing as if it was a screen door on your back porch in Mayberry. I mean, you could hear the thing reverberate. And so now the show is over, and the stage manager and some of the cameramen come up, hey, Bob, if he had jumped you, we had your back. Wait a minute. You're over here behind a mile of cable. I'm 6 inches from this madman.
Can you watch the Olympics as a fan now?
Yeah. Yeah, I watch it casually, just like I did the 2018 Winter Games from Pyeongchang. I'm interested not only in some of the competition, but in how my former colleagues and longtime friends are doing. I've texted a few of them before and during the games, but I'm not obsessed with it. I'm not sitting there monitoring it. If I plop down on the couch and something's going on, then I check it out.
And of all the great things you did with the Olympics, and I'm sure Pinkeye, conjunctivitis still comes up, certainly in the time of the Olympics. How often does it come up? It
comes up pretty frequently, and I know it's part of my obituary. And in the darker recesses of the Internet, there are bizarre theories as to how I contracted it, none of which are remotely true. But you have to have a sense of humor about it. At the time, I tried to just, acknowledge it. You had to. If you just felt lousy, you go to work. We've all done that. If I had a broken leg, it would have been in a cast under the desk, wouldn't have to refer to it. But it was literally written right there on my face. So I just tried to have a line or two to acknowledge it and then move on as best I could. But the amazing thing is that some people think that I am subject to illness, and specifically pink eye, only during the Olympics. So we go from 2014 to 2016 in Rio, and it's like, Bob, how are your eyes? What is it? Only during that specific quadrennial period that I'm going to get pink eye?
Wait, do you have it this week? You didn't get it this week?
No.
Okay.
No. I think I pulled a hamstring getting out of bed, but apart from that.
When you know the results and it's tape delayed, but do you have to can you present it, or is the feeling to present it in a way that, hey, I'm going to act as if I don't know what happened?
No, I think what we always tried to do was acknowledge on the first night of competition, not the opening ceremony, but the first night of full competition, if it was the circumstance where all of it had to be presented on tape or a substantial amount, you acknowledge that, and then you try and use the right tense. Instead of is going for his or her second gold medal, was going for his or her second gold medal. I'm sure there were unintentional slip-ups occasionally, but you try to let them know up front this is what it is. You don't reiterate it every night because some people want to experience it as they're watching it, if not as it happens. We hear that all the time. If you don't want to know the result, turn away. But now as the world has changed a whole lot since my first Olympics in 1988, we know that millions and millions of people are aware of what's happened. But millions more still just want to see it with the full presentation, with the backstories and the features and everything else. The most extreme was Sydney in 2000, where you're literally a world away. And some of the events that I was leading into the next day, not only did I know the result, I had attended them the night before, and I'm reading about them in the Sydney newspapers as I'm in the car on the way to the studio. So I felt then as if I was on the History Channel.
You didn't have a cutaway of you in the crowd where you then commented on you being in the crowd while you were hosting the Olympics, did you?
You know, I was not bright enough to demand that. That would have been very amusing, but it didn't happen.
How often have you doubted yourself when you're broadcasting?
You know, I don't want to get too deeply into this, but when you're doing play-by-play, and in my case, baseball now, and you get into your 60s, you have to realize that unless you really watch it, you're not exactly as sharp as you used to be. You know, during COVID, before there were any games, both the NBA network and the baseball network were showing classic games. And I would stumble across some of them. In fact, I think it was on your show, Dan, when Al Michaels and I were on at the same time, and Al said, I'm on 3 networks at once, football, baseball, and NBA games. And on occasion, I was on at least 2 at once. And then YouTube tosses stuff out there, stuff you don't even remember doing or haven't thought about in a long time. And I contrast the level of sharpness from the 80s and 90s. You know, I think I'm still pretty sharp, but is there a fall-off that at least I can recognize from maybe 100% to 92% or 93% on occasion? Yeah. And so maybe like a pitcher whose stuff has changed but can still be effective, you change your approach a little bit. So I have to be careful. And the other thing that's happened is, you know, your eyesight isn't quite as good as you get older. And so in baseball, unlike basketball or something, that wouldn't affect me much. In baseball, you're calling the game. You got a monitor in the booth. But if there's a long fly ball to the outfield and you're recessed from the backstop by I don't know how many feet, but you're probably at that point 600, 700 feet away, with the naked eye, you can't 100% trust yourself on the flight of the ball. So you got to go off the monitor. So I tend to slow things down a little bit rather than just kind of jumping on it right away. I try to be a little bit more cautious. What a boring answer, but you asked.
But then you have the luxury of a Shohei Ohtani home run where you don't have to go, I don't know if that's going to get out of here.
Yeah, right.
I've never, can you remember, and you've been at the ballpark all your life, but the sound is different, Bob, with Shohei Ohtani.
Yeah, there have been, through the years, a handful of hitters for whom that applies. I remember the late, great Buck O'Neill talking about that and saying when he closed his eyes, he knew it was Babe Ruth or Josh Gibson, the other one he cited from the Negro Leagues, and then later on Mickey Mantle, and then after that, Bo Jackson. I think Shohei is on that short list where literally if you turned your back during batting practice, the sound coming off their bats was different.
Yeah, I would go. You could go and just listen to batting practice with Ohtani and be entertained. You don't even have to watch because I love it's in your mind like, oh, my God, where's that gone? It's like radio. If you listen, that you just hear the crack of the bat, and it's just Seton, do you have Shohei Ohtani's home run from last night? Let's see if we can. Okay, here you go. It sounds like it's out of a cartoon, doesn't it?
It sure does. And, people talk about the launch angle approach, and some are critical of it because it's part of what's created these three perfect outcomes: strikeout, walk, home run, deprives baseball of action. But when you have someone who's perfected it, if Ted Williams saw Shohei Ohtani, he would approve of Shohei's approach. It is a perfect, natural uppercut swing. But he also excels at putting the ball in play. I mean, here's a guy who'll pitch 6 innings for you, maybe 6 shutout innings. I haven't checked recently, but at one point he led the league in triples. He steals bases. Yeah. He does everything.
Is he better than Babe Ruth?
So difficult to compare. Ruth, when he was primarily pitching, was one of the great pitchers of his time and would have made the Hall of Fame as a pitcher. And then when he became primarily a hitter, almost exclusively, he dominated the league in a way that no one else has in baseball. It's comparable to Wilt Chamberlain averaging 50 in basketball, or Wayne Gretzky's gap over everyone else in goals, assists, and total points. Before the rest of baseball sort of caught up, Ruth was hitting more home runs than entire teams. So, but he never blended hitting and pitching at this level of effectiveness the way Ohtani did. So you can make a case for Ohtani looking at it from that perspective, another case for Ruth from the other perspective, and then you just have to say, wait a minute. Comparing eras and the circumstances under which they competed makes it an interesting parlor game, but you can never arrive at a definitive answer.
You remember your first game in person?
Yeah. Well, actually, I got to give 2 answers to this. My dad, I don't know if he was prescient or it was just luck. In 1957, I'm 5 years old. He took me to a game at Ebbets Field, so I can say I went to a game at Ebbets Field. I don't remember anything except how green the grass was, and you've heard people tell that story all the time. It's like Dorothy arriving in Oz, and it goes from black and white to color, because all anybody had then was a black and white television set with a tiny screen. I don't remember any particulars of the game. He also took me to one at the Polo Grounds, and as I'm sitting on his shoulders toward the back of the grandstand, he said to me, "Bobby, look at that player right there. No, not that one. The one in the middle. That's Willie Mays." As if he was farsighted enough to know that that would be something I'd want to remember for the rest of my life. As if he was saying, son, that's the Washington Monument. That's the Eiffel Tower. That's Willie Mays. But I don't remember any particulars of the game. The game I remember, I was 7, and my dad took me to a late-season game between the Orioles and the Yankees at the old Yankee Stadium. And I was heartbroken that Mantle didn't play that day, and the Orioles won the game 7-2. And back then, you could leave, they'd let the fans leave by walking around the warning track. And then they'd open up the bullpen gates, and you poured out into the street where the elevated subway was. So we walk around, and it's awe-inspiring enough, the old Yankee Stadium, the wedding cake facade, the 3 decks of the whole thing. But then the monuments, and there were only 3 of them at that time, the monuments were on the field, because center field was 461 feet from home plate. So the 3 monuments to Ruth, Gehrig, and their manager, Miller Huggins, are right there with the flagpole behind it. And we get to the monuments. And what would any 7-year-old kid think? I I thought they were buried there on the warning track. I honestly thought, Dan, this was the sacred Yankee burial ground, and Joe DiMaggio would be interred there, and eventually, and this is the part that really got to me, Mickey Mantle was going to be buried there. And I started to cry. My father's trying to assure me, yeah, these three guys are dead, but they're buried someplace else.
Given the craziness of this, sports collecting business, how valuable are your baseball cards, your Mickey Mantle card?
The one that I save is from 1958. The first one I remember getting out of a Topps pack of Topps bubblegum cards. I imagine that one's worth, since it's in pretty good condition, somewhere in the single digits in the thousands, maybe 4,000 or 5,000.
Oh, okay.
But, a mint condition 1952 Mantle, there was a big story recently in Sports Illustrated about this. Those are going into the millions of dollars.
Bob has got his new show. It's old show, it's a newer version of his older show. It's called Back on the Record with Bob Costas. That'll be coming up this Friday night at 11 Eastern, 11 Pacific. Charles Barkley will sit down with him. Back on the Record with Bob Costas. Great to have you back on the show, Bob. Thanks for joining us as always, and good luck with the program.
Thanks a lot, Dan. See ya.
All right, we'll take a break. We'll come back after this.